Ok. Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos a esta primera sesión del seminario Repensar el Pensamiento Computacional. Mi nombre es Daniel Sánchez Guzmán. Les damos la más cordial bienvenida. Voy a dar unas breves indicaciones en español, ya que la dinámica de toda la sesión va a ser en inglés. Lo primero que van a hacer es que en su pantalla del canal de YouTube van a activar los subtítulos y van a seleccionar el idioma español para que se haga una traducción simultánea de toda la sesión. Del resto, si no llegara a aparecer la traducción simultánea, va a aparecer los subtítulos en inglés y si tuvieran alguna pregunta o comentario, lo pueden formular en el chat en español y nosotros nos encargaremos de hacer las traducciones correspondientes. Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias. Damos inicio a esta sesión inaugural con la profesora Jeannette Wing. Thank you so much, everyone. And let's begin this session of the seminar, Rethinking the Computational Thinking. It's a seminar where we have the connection with researchers and people that is expert in this kind of topics. And well, I pass the word to Professor Erika. Professor Erika, thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, students, faculty, and researchers. Welcome to the first meeting, to this session of the first session of the cycle of talks of Rethinking Computational Thinking Seminar. I'm Erika Cervantes Juarez, and today I'm joined to this session by Camilo Vieira, Daniel Sánchez Guzmán, and Daniel Andrés Quiroz Vallejo.
Thank you, Erika, and hello, Daniel, Dr. Wing, and Daniel. A special welcome to those following us from all over the place in Latin America, from different institutions, and those who will be watching this later. Today, we have the pleasure of talking with Professor Jeannette Wing from Columbia University, whose 2006 essay about computational thinking had a great influence on how we've been integrating computer science into the school system. Myself, I've been working for over 15 years with this mission. So thank you, Jeannette, for being here and for sharing with us 20 years later what has changed since then. This seminar, like the rest of the Repensar series, seeks to connect research with teaching practices and public policy. Please, for everyone, post your questions in the YouTube chat next to the streaming. We will be attentive to bringing them into the conversation.
Thank you so much, Camilo. It's my pleasure to open this session, whose theme is 20 years of computational thinking, from the original formulation to future visions and approaches. For more than 20 years, Dr. Jeannette Wing has advanced in the idea that the forms of reasoning associated with computing are useful for everyone, not only for those who program, not only for scientists, and only for technical and specialized personnel. She's a professor of computer science at Columbia University, where she leads research. Previously, she chaired the computer science department at Carnegie Mellon University and led research at Microsoft. Today, her work focuses on how to make artificial intelligence systems more trustworthy. Dr. Wing, welcome.
Thank you very much. I thought I would start by first, let's see, I should have my view, right? Not you, or you still have the view? Should I? Okay,
Sure.
never mind. I'll just speak this way. All right. First, I wanted to just make some remarks about why I wrote that paper 20 years ago. And I think that will help level set what my intention was in talking about computational thinking. And there were three reasons I wrote that paper around, well, it was published in 2006. So I had already started talking about computational thinking in 2004. That 2004 was just after the dot-com bust in the world, but certainly in the United States. And the consequence of that is that we were seeing a decline in enrollments in computer science departments across the universities in the United States. And so the computer science faculty were concerned about why are we losing the student interest in computer science. And so I wrote that paper for a few reasons. One is specifically to address that problem. And what I saw as one of the problems is that we were teaching introduction to computer science to either computer science majors or other majors, like introduction to computer science. And what were we teaching in those classes? We were teaching introduction to Pascal or introduction to whatever your favorite programming language is or was at the time. For most people, especially non-majors, that's not very interesting. It's actually boring and tedious and something that you might want to run away from. So we were not even interesting to most people on campus. And then even for the computer science majors, we were doing them a disservice because we made it sound as if introduction to computer science is all about programming. The second reason, another reason I wrote that paper is to really galvanize the computer science community to say we have more as a discipline to offer than how to program a computer. We have fundamental scientific techniques, a fundamental science, and we certainly have a way of thinking that is, I think, special to computer science, and that's what we should be promoting. We also have outstanding scientific challenges, and we need smart people to study computer science so they can help solve those challenges. So it was a combination of all those reasons that I wrote that 3-page article. And in the article, I did not have a very crisp definition of computational thinking. Rather, I had a whole bunch of examples. To be honest, I wrote that article to be a little poetic rather than technical. And I remember talking to the editor of CACM, and this is like the day before he was about to publish the article. And he said, Jeannette, you really need a technical definition of computational thinking. And I said, well, I can't come up with one overnight. And you have to just do what is there. And I'm sorry. I realized that was a shortfall of my article early on. And I certainly did not think that that article would come to define what computational thinking means. And it certainly, what happened was, of course, the term computational thinking was very appealing and itself, I think, quite inspiring. And it was not specific to any discipline. It wasn't specific to computer science or mathematics or science in general. But in any case, I wrote the article, and there was a lot of interest in what computational thinking means. And one of the first concrete consequences is that people who are teaching introduction to computer science courses in college were revisiting what they should teach. So that was a good consequence. But it really wasn't until I went to the National Science Foundation a year after I published the article, when I had a national platform to promote what computational thinking is and could be for all other disciplines. And in two ways, I used that national platform to benefit a grander scale of people I normally would be able to reach. First, I had an opportunity to help create a program within the National Science Foundation that was really about computational thinking in all other disciplines, like in all other sciences. We called it Cyber-Enabled Discovery and Innovation, and it was a foundation-wide program where directorates from all disciplines contributed some money, and we ran a foundation-wide call for proposals, and we were able to light up how computational thinking could help physicists, biologists, chemists, geoscientists, education researchers, and so on. So this was very much in line with what I had in mind for how computational thinking could be used by anyone for advancing any discipline. But I also was fortunate that at the National Science Foundation, I had a program director who was very interested in K through 12 education. And she had her name was Jan Cooney, and she had the brilliant idea to tackle a very a level of education that is highly leverageable, and that was the high school level. And in particular, she worked very hard to try to inculcate computational thinking into what we have in the United States, the Advanced Placement Computer Science course. So this is a computer science course that high school students take. And at the time, it was introduction to your favorite programming language. But with computational thinking as a new way of designing that APCS course, we were able to, first of all, create a new APCS course and include more of these computer science concepts rather than just programming. We didn't get rid of the other one, but we just added a new one. So the beauty of that was, as we were creating that new high school course, the colleges were revisiting their intro courses. So now, as a high school student, you could take this AP class and have it count towards that college class. So there was an incentive for high school students to take this computational thinking course because it would count towards college credit. That's how AP courses work in general in the United States. So I was able to take advantage of my position at the National Science Foundation, where I was the director of the Computer Information Science and Engineering Directorate, and push on the research front of using computational thinking, but also push on the education front. Now, while this was happening, of course, I still didn't have a very crisp definition of computational thinking, and that was very exasperating to everyone. But over time, in conversations that, in particular, I had with Al Aho, who was at Columbia at the time, Al Aho is a very famous computer scientist, and he had been thinking about how to promote computational thinking at Columbia University. And he and I had an exchange of messages where I converged on a crisper definition, which I think I published in some 2010 blog article at the University of Toronto site. And I explained the definition, and I was much happier with that definition, and I kind of use that as my definition now. But what I really wanted to emphasize for computational thinking, that it's the thinking part, it's the thought processes that human beings do to both formulate a problem and formulate a solution to that problem that can be expressed in a way that a computer can solve. So it has all the right technical terms in there. For instance, problem solving, obviously, but also expressing means writing down in a language. And then in a way that a computer can solve means writing down in a language that a computer can understand. And so on and so forth. But I also was quite generous in what I meant by a computer. I didn't mean just a machine as we know and love it of today, but humans are computers too. And this is very much part of my early thinking on computational thinking, that humans compute. We compute some things very quickly and some things very slowly compared to a machine. We're still better at certain things than machines and vice versa. And over time, of course, computer meant the combination of a human and a machine working together. And what we can see is even more kinds of problems that can be solved, posed and unsolved by this combination of humans and machines working together. So I really wanted to emphasize that I'm very well aware that in 2006, I did not have a crisp definition, and this probably set the whole community and all going haywire in all sorts of different directions. And I apologize for that, but I tried to correct that by 2010. But as you know, your first papers is what gets read, and certainly blog posts don't get read. I did have the opportunity to kind of put it in writing in a CACM article that was published, Computational Thinking 10 years later. And I hope that kind of help level set people and put them in at a better direction. And then by then, computational thinking 10 years later, I had already seen progress in adding computational thinking to K through 12. In particular, the UK had started including what they were calling CS at school, computational thinking for the K through 12 level. And they had, because the UK can do it, they have a Ministry of Education that just sets the curriculum for the whole country. They are able to just say, we're going to change a curriculum in this way, and voila, it's done. In the US, we have 10,000 school districts or more. It's highly decentralized, and you have to kind of change each school district one by one. So it's much harder to realize that kind of transformation in K through 12 education in the United States. And this is one reason I said in one of those articles I wrote how teacher training is important, but it's also difficult because it will be very dependent on the local culture and governance and framework that each country or each state or each city or each region has for educating the K through 12 students. Meanwhile, in the research front, the use of computing in solving problems in any discipline had become kind of course, commonplace. You can't advance in your scientific career without knowing how to use computers effectively. So I didn't really have to push on that, especially in the science and engineering disciplines. It kind of took care of itself, if you will. So now let's look at computational thinking 20 years later. And this brings us to today. And I think this is really quite relevant today because of the advent of AI and because of the advent of large language models, and because of the most recent successes that LLMs and generative AI have had with respect to, being able to code, being able to write. These are skills that computer scientists and others need, and it causes all of us to rethink again. What should we be teaching computer scientists? What should we be teaching students who major in computer science? And how should we be teaching students who major in computer science? And how should we be teaching students more generally, whether you're majoring in computer science or not? These are very difficult questions to solve, to answer, and we don't have any easy answers. Meanwhile, the technology is speeding along way ahead of us human beings who like to take our time to be thoughtful and answer these questions. So it's a very exciting time. Again, what I have been thinking about is, and I've been conferring with a lot of my colleagues in computer science about this, is how that much more important computational thinking has become with the advent of AI, because it just makes the point even stronger, that computer science is more than just computer programming. If you study computer science and all you study is computer programming, then why don't you just have the machine do it all? And clearly, I don't believe that. And clearly, from the early days of what I was saying, where computational thinking really is about the thought processes that human beings use, and now I would say machines too, it's not just about coding. Now, I want to say another couple words about computational thinking is not just coding. There's a sentence in my 2006 paper which says something to the effect of computer science is not computer programming or something like that. For a few years after I published that paper, I kind of regretted not inserting the word just computer programming. In other words, computer science is not just computer programming. I actually deliberately did not put that word in 2006, but many people, after I wrote the paper, I realized that it might have been confusing to people. But now with AI having, in some sense, taken over coding, I'm really glad I didn't put that word in, because I really do want to distinguish computational thinking from coding. And so it's not that coding doesn't help you think computationally. Of course it does. It is the concrete realization of computational thinking. It makes you put things, in much more concrete terms. But early on, as many of you have read and heard me speak about, you can think computationally without a machine. And some early work that was done, I can't forget, I forgot the name of that. It was Tim Ball's work. Forgot the name of that system where you basically
Don't worry.
What's it called? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, everything's clear.
CS
Erika?
Unplugged. That's it.
Yes,
CS
no,
Unplugged,
please.
something like that.
I'll say something. Yes.
Yeah, where you can line up the children, the 4-year-olds, and they can figure out a sorting algorithm. And you don't need machines for that, but then they learn how to sort. And they don't use machines, but they learn algorithm. Other sorts of games that you can play like that. So those are my introductory remarks. I really wanted to make sure people understood where I came from, my intention, and that I recognize that times have changed, and I do think computational thinking is that much more important now, with AI being in everyone's on everyone's radar. But we don't have answers to any of this. So I'll stop and let you ask me some questions.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you so much for this introductory chat talks. Everything was great, fabulous, because you have a wide vision on everything. Please, I pass the word to Professor Erika.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Jeannette, for this clarification of this concept, the purpose, and the story about how it started. But I have a specific question about the educational concepts. For example, in the last 30 years ago, there's a growing evidence of that the computational thinking in an early childhood and in elementary education can support a broader cognitive development and potentially help to reduce these educational gaps. So, but we know we have many problems, and also a huge problem is the access of this kind of learning opportunities. So, in your experience, do you think or do you believe that the computational thinking is a potential tool for reducing these inequities, or maybe it's is a way to support our educational systems, or maybe do you think there is an equity promoting to this kind of opportunities in other sense to promote or to reduce even these gaps in education, for example in Latin America, or what do you think about this kind of topics?
I'm not sure what gap you're asking about. Can you just clarify what gap you're talking about?
A difference in opportunities of learning for the students in early ages, for example. Many
So,
students have different ways to.
yeah,
Maybe the
look,
material.
I'm not an education expert. I don't really study, and I certainly do not study early childhood education. So anything I say would be off the cuff and not with with wisdom. I think computational thinking can be added to the tool set of all thinking skills like mathematical thinking. It's just another way to think about problem solving. And however, those skills help reduce the inequity gap. I'm sure computational thinking can add to that, reducing the inequity gap. As I mentioned, you don't need a computer to think computationally. And you can do it like with mathematics, you can do it with pencil and paper. So as long as you have the proper guidance from the teacher, who can help you learn the concepts, and then learn how to apply the concepts in everyday life, then I don't think that computational thinking is any different from any other thinking skill that a student might learn, with respect to reducing the inequity gap.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Daniel?
Thanks so much.
Thank you for your point of view with this question, Jeannette, Dr. Jeannette. So you just make the difference between coding and computational thinking by clarifying that coding can help you thinking computationally, but also you can do that, for example, in mathematics with paper and pencil. So in the case of large language models, these models are changing what it means to think computationally. So if AI can now write code, debug programs, manipulate data, and perform like any task that we traditionally used to teach through computational thinking, so I wonder which computational thinking skills do you believe remain like essential for everyone to learn, and which
I
ones
think
might
I
not?
want to answer that. I want to answer that question in two parts. First of all,
Okay.
large language models and AI and big data have absolutely changed how we interact with computing systems. So the way I would think about it is all the computational thinking skills that we have known and loved, from algorithms to systems composition, abstraction, all the things that we've been doing are still relevant. What AI has done is it is alerted us to the importance of big data. And if there's one thing that I did not emphasize in my 2006 article, it was the importance of data. And it even surprised the computer science community when ChatGPT came out. We had neural networks, we had all these, big fancy AI systems, but when ChatGPT came out, it was the massive scale of the training data and the massive scale of the model that surprised, and the capability based on that surprised even the computer science community. And I think we all underestimated the importance and the value of big data. So if there's one thing I would add, or if there are existing curricula, I would make sure to include in existing curricula data, analyzing data, all the systems aspects of collecting data and organizing the data, managing the data, but most importantly, analyzing the data. And then that's one thing. So data is clearly much more important now than it had been recognized before. The second is inherent to these AI models, like large language models, is probabilities. And this is where I think we really need to make sure that our students have some facility with probability and statistics. This is something that is actually also maybe even foreign to some computer scientists, because one thing that we love in computer science is that we're able to abstract away from enough of the real world that we can represent it digitally. True or false, 0, 1, yes or no, on or off. Our lives have been built on digital logic. We abstract away from transistors, which are not digital, and we have everything else is 0 and 1 above. But AI reintroduces our need to reason about real numbers and functions over reals, and maybe less sophisticated, just probabilities. The LLM, or the deep neural network that's a predictor, predicts that this tumor is benign with a 0.9 next to the prediction, not 0, 1. Yet the doctor is going to base his or her treatment on the patient that says the tumor is benign based on the 0.9. And so that is that's one reason we need to make sure that we teach our students some notions of probability. Statistics is important because of big data. The statistics field has been working in big data for their entire lives. Big data is not new to them. But they have not, in computer science, we always think about worst case. We've been trained to think about analyzing an algorithm in terms of worst case behavior. In statistics is about average. So we need to, in computer science, when we're working with big data, really think about how to benefit from the statistical thinking, not just computational thinking. and so on. So this is where I think a lot of these fields are converging, or at least they're starting to talk to each other. But in any case,
Yes,
Daniel,
Daniel.
I think that the real answer to your question is we still need all the concepts that we've been advocating for the past 20 years for computational thinking, but we need to double down on the data aspect, and we need to make sure that we also are exposing our students, whether it's in computer science courses or math courses or other courses, to probability and statistics.
Thank you. Camilo?
Thank you, Dr. Wing. From your introductory remarks, you kind of like make that connection with AI very strongly. And now from Danielle's comment, you make that connection to big data, which was going to be like my next question about data science that has also like established as a new field. There are now departments of data science, there are programs of data science. So a couple of questions. First one is like maybe for the teachers who are in the audience, like what do you understand or describe as big data? And do we also have to like even care about small data if it was a term even? And I've seen, like, I personally work with like teacher professional development on how to integrate this computational thinking into the K-12. And I've seen many of my colleagues like moving towards data science education. So I wonder if you see this as a separate thing, as it is in like at the college level is data science, computer science, sometimes it's like different departments. Do you see it as, oh no, you should integrate all these skills of data science into this broader idea of computer science? And yeah, and is that also a way of connecting back again to your introductory remarks of making computer science and slash data science available for every discipline, because like data is everywhere?
Yeah, I used to run the Data Science Institute at Columbia, and I had to think really hard about what is data science. And, I do think it's not just the way computer science treats data. There's every aspect of computer science has something to say about data, starting with collecting data, storing data, managing it, and analyzing it, and then even visualizing it. So I do think that all aspects of computer science is touched by data and touches data. But the techniques that I mentioned earlier about statistical techniques are really quite important to analyzing big data. And, early work in machine learning could really have been called statistical machine learning. And it was really the application of statistical techniques to large data that could be that's digitized and thus storable on a computer way beyond what we could have done without computers. And I think that was a big difference. Once you could store anything on a computer, then it's essentially almost infinite. So the big data is really important. But let me speak about small data, because not all problems have big data. And there are a lot of fields and a lot of particular tasks that you want to do where you don't have big data. And it's actually frustrating because people want to use AI and LLMs and DNNs, but they don't have a lot of training data. So they feel like, oh, I want to use those fancy techniques, but I can't build the model so I can use the fancy techniques. So I do think small data is still important. There's another reason small data is important. And I would say it's not just small data, but small models. So as you know, the big tech companies are using more and more compute power with more and more data to build bigger and bigger models. But this narrows the access of who can even, build these models, let alone train the models with the big data and run the models. And that is, there's an inequity issue there, Erica. So I think where, especially people who are in academia can be thinking about, what they can be thinking about is, how can we get the benefits and the functionality of big data and big models and big compute with smaller data and smaller models and smaller compute. And this reminds me of the late 90s in computer science, where when we wanted to scale something up, we just threw more processors at it. We actually were not inventing clever algorithms until we started becoming scared of Moore's law ending. And then we said, oh my goodness, we better take advantage of parallel computing more, and come up with clever algorithms. And this helped the community start thinking about the better use of the compute power they had and better use of parallelization, and came up with new algorithms and new programming language paradigms, et cetera, et cetera. So I see this as another opportunity, especially in academia, where you don't have access to big compute and big models and big data. However, it's easy enough to say that. There's always a lot of envy, especially now with the people with the big machines and the big models and the big data. So I think we're still at an early stage in where the research is going on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeannette, for all these discussion, questions, and explanations. I part from this, of the models, the small models. When I teach physics, I ask to my students, well, let's put together minds. Let's start to working together. And I said, think in a bicycle, right? When you start to think in a bicycle, not everyone thinks the same bicycle. Thinks the bicycle, that's the bicycle, but don't think the same bicycle. Think in a bicycle that was a gift in their gardens, in their garage. So the models is there. The model is the bicycle, no? But we have different models in our mind. So we can start to see that how models share with us and how we can be part of the models and sharing, and for what need to know about the bicycle. Maybe things on equipment, security equipment that I need to use. Some other things in their family, in the bicycle, in the ride in the afternoon. And that's very important, because when we try to take this part of the computational thinking, it's when we can to start to share and to standardize concepts, models, and that brings the students the part of learning and maybe another more abstract concepts, right? It's a scaffolding that we have to take with students. And what do you think about this? How education tries to work with the computational thinking and computational scientists and all the management of the data? How can we put together these two sides of what we want when a person starts to link, not only from the early to the oldest? How can we see this vision? I know that's
Wait,
in some
I
parts
don't
it's
understand what you talked about bicycles, but then you started a question, which
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
What is the
Okay.
question?
Yes, the question is, how can be switched or connected the educational vision for our students in our classrooms and the policies and the governments with the vision of the computational thinking? How can we make a translation or transition that the educational or learning process will be benefit from the computational thinking? The learning process, I guess, a kid that we want, he learns adding, multiplying, dividing. Computational thinking is a very complex but I know I would like to try to explain my idea and the question. Do you think that there's remembering, Erica, a gap between education, between computational thinking, and how can we have this scaffolding from one to another to get a better instruction in students?
Well,
Did I
I
explain?
think, first of all, you're asking me again a question about, in some sense, early
Formalize.
childhood education.
Yes.
I did say in one of my papers or one of my talks that in mathematics, we figured out the sequence of concepts that we can teach as children progress in their maturity of understanding concepts. And it would be nice if computer science had a similar progression of concepts. But I'm not the kind of the person, the expert who would understand how does a person's mind, a child's mind grow. I think, work should be done in that
Okay.
area. I would imagine the last 20 years, people have thought about that question. So for instance, I would say one of the most important concepts that I think really distinguishes computer science from any other, even math, is abstraction. And by abstraction, we mean many different things. We have lambda abstraction, procedural abstraction, data abstraction, and system abstraction, all sorts of abstraction. And we talk about layers of abstraction. I think what is especially important in computer science is that computer scientists have to think of multiple layers of abstraction at the same time, at least two layers. You're thinking about the layer you're providing a service to, but the layer below you that you are leaning on in order so you can build your layer. But then most importantly, you need to relate the behaviors at the top layer with the behaviors in all the other layers below. And we use commuting diagrams for that. We take from mathematics the ability to do that reasoning so that we can ensure that the layers even make sense. So all of that is really fundamental to how we build systems in computers. If you think about the internet, without TCP/IP, we would be nowhere. But the whole internet is built on that layer of abstraction.
That's a great example.
We underestimate the beauty of that invention. Because with the internet layer like this, supporting the TCP/IP protocol, it was agnostic to what devices below had to provide that interface, and it was agnostic to the applications above that you can build on top of that interface. So over time, we have been able to plug any old device someone creates below and build all sorts of wild and crazy applications above. To me, that is
Completely agree. Yes.
the most beautiful example of layers of abstraction. Not a lot of layers, but once you have identified that particular layer, you can do so much. You can do more than you could imagine. And in fact, over the decades, very creative people have imagined all sorts of things on top and below. And that is like very core computer science. So abstraction is really key. And I just gave you an example. What I thought you were going to talk about, so let me answer your question, but let me first say what I thought you were going to talk about when you were talking about bicycles is actually, what is a bicycle? And this is a fundamental question that the AI researchers have since the 60s or earlier tried to answer. What is a chair? I remember taking an AI course when I was an undergraduate, and we had to answer the question, what is a chair? How would you describe a chair in a way that a machine can understand? But, does the chair have to have 4 legs? No. But, is a stool a chair? It's kind of a chair, but a chair doesn't have to have any legs. Is a chair just about something you can sit on? All of a sudden, it's not a physical it's a function. I don't actually know the answer, but that goes to show how even back then, we in computer science were struggling with the simplest characterizations, the characterizations of the simplest objects. So a bicycle is it's more complicated than a chair. But you can use a bicycle to talk about composition, and about functionality versus structure, and all sorts of computational thinking concepts. But to answer your question more directly, how do you bridge the gap? I think that abstraction is key. So somehow, whether you're a 4-year-old, I think 4-year-olds actually understand abstract concepts more than we give them credit. So 4-year-olds, what kinds of abstract concepts or abstractions can we teach them? Often they just need a few examples and they generalize from that. I mean, they don't need to be shown every single chair to say it's a chair, right? And then the other is pattern matching. I think patterns come up a lot. And that is very common. Children are very good at identifying patterns. We are very good at teaching patterns. So I think that the other concept I think children can learn easily is a notion of composition. So if you think about a puzzle, you're putting these pieces together, they get that. And you would ideally like your computer system to be put together in a similarly modular way where you have clean interfaces and things just fit in. Of course, they don't in real life, but you can teach those concepts, and you don't need machines to teach those concepts. But those are important computational thinking concepts. But I don't know what the progression of the concepts is. That's beyond my skill level, my training. And I wouldn't dare say, we could teach one before the other, or, all the things I just mentioned are too simple. I don't know.
No, but we will try to figure out.
But
how
I
to
do
fix
think
it.
algorithms
Yes.
are also important. I remember, I think I've said words about, we teach long division. Long division is just an algorithm. Actually, there are different ways to do long division. Each one is an algorithm. We could be teaching those concepts. I think children are not, they're old enough to understand those concepts. We just don't use the word. So when we teach long division, why don't we use the word algorithm, and they get familiar with that, and then they can discover algorithms in their daily lives.
Yes, thank you so much, Janet. Camilo, thank you for your
Yeah,
answer.
great, Dr. Wing, thank you. So just one comment on the latest question, and then a couple of questions for you. So we've done analysis of the different curricula all over the world, and like in general, what's going on is that in early years, like from early childhood to elementary schools, they go to basic skills like algorithm design, debugging, and then they go towards more application of like data science and implementation of apps and other things, and more like programming and of course modeling and simulation as well in high school. I personally think that especially for elementary school, everything goes around algorithm design, because you do abstraction, you do debugging, you do decomposition to do an algorithm. So that's usually a very useful tool to integrate computational thinking. I wanted to go back to, and before we go into the questions from the audience, I wanted to go back to your initial points. You started talking about CS enrollment that inspired you to do that initial talk and then that initial article. And I wonder like how much that has changed. I know that how it has changed in Colombia, and it goes like this, especially now with LLMs again, like it's influencing that. I don't know how is it going that in the US. And then the latest question that I'd like to ask is, I agree that this is useful for everyone, not just for computer scientists. But when I came back from Purdue to Colombia in 2017, most of the programs that were happening here around computational thinking were about programming to have software developers. And I think that's also part of the discussion, or that gap between policymakers and educators or researchers, and how we make the case that this is not just to have more programmers, more software developers, but to have biologists who can do computing, material scientists who can do computer, artists who can do computer. So, and how does that happen there, and how, like, what would be good advice to push to that goal?
Oh, well, there are a lot of questions in that question. So let me take the last one first. I think, you know, one of the reasons I benefited from being at the National Science Foundation is I had a national platform that could influence policymakers. And so it may be that you need to find some champions who are in, you know, science policy or education policy, and get them to understand, and then get them to influence the people who need to be influenced. You know, it's very hard to do it as an individual. One way in which the UK was able to do this through computing at school is, of course, they're organized in that top-down manner. But one of my colleagues who was at Microsoft Research in Cambridge at the time was instrumental in creating a network of teachers and helping them understand what computational thinking is and how computational thinking can be taught in the K through 12 system at the K through 12 level. So it does take some, you know, passionate person to make things happen, but you can't do it on your own. You need a network, and this is a great network that you have assembled here. But you also need to know who the policymakers are and how to influence them and convince them. It's a given that every discipline can benefit from computation or computational thinking. I think certainly the science and engineering disciplines, it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's we don't have to sell that story. I think the newer story is to sell them on AI. I think the sciences get it. The humanities may be less embracing, but we'll probably get there. The first part of your question was about CS enrollments. One of the reasons as I mentioned, I wrote that paper is that, you know, we had seen a dip in computer science enrollments. And, you know, I was old enough, I'm even older now, at that time to say, oh, I'm not worried about these ups and downs in computer science. Perhaps it's because I already took that jump into majoring in computer science before there were even computer science textbooks. And I just put my faith that this is a discipline, you know, to study, and that had its own value and scientific challenges and scientific questions. And it hasn't gone away. So, and so when we had that dip in the early 2000s, I was again trying to tell my colleagues in computer science, don't wring your hands and moan and groan about computer science going away. Let's explain what computer science is and how, and the joy of computer science and what thinking skills we bring to the table. Now, yes, the AI explosion has definitely affected computer science enrollments in the United States. I don't know where we are now, but I'm ever an optimist. I actually think we're going to need more computer science, you know, in the future. Partly, we need people who understand these AI models and how to build them and use them and so on. But there's a more important aspect of AI that I haven't touched on, which is actually my own research area, and that is trusting these AI models. There's no rhyme or reason why we should trust any of them, because they're not we don't even have a science of understanding what they do. We kind of, it's like a big experiment. We poke at it and something comes out and we like the answer, or we don't like the answer, or we don't know what to make of the answer. That's where we are. We're in this big experimental phase of AI with no foundational scientific foundations to stand on. And so that already is a little worrisome. The second is more practically, as you're reading in the news, it's as easy to build AI systems that do bad things than it is to do good things. And in fact, we can't even predict whether an AI system is going to be good or bad. But let's say we have the intention of building a good AI system. We don't even have a good way to, give you any formal guarantees that it does what you want. And that is where my area of verification comes in. And there's a lot of interest in combining methods of formal methods and verification with the AI methods and models of today. And that's an active area of research. And this is why, again, I see more opportunities for research in computer science and AI opening up, maybe with a different focus in the future, maybe with the focus of trying to actually make some sense of these systems, scientific sense, and ensure that they do good things and not bad things. Or maybe just detect when a bad actor has taken over and is making the AI system do bad things. But all of this, by the way, is moving way too slowly compared to how fast the technology is moving.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeannette. Erika?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Jeannette. We have many comments and questions from our audience, so I'm going to read some one of them. Fanny Estrada says, I love computational thinking. It's not only about programming. It is also helps me master the structured cognitive processes that let us break complex challenges down into steps. So Martin says, I would like to ask to Dr. Wing whether board games built around problem solving using the components of computational thinking support learning among primary school students. What do you think, Professor Jeannette? What do you think about?
Can you just repeat the question part of the question?
Yes, the question of Martin is, do you think if, for example, using the computational thinking, it could be a support for learning in primary school or primary students, maybe could help us?
I'm not sure whether the question is, can computational thinking be taught to primary school students, or whether, yes, I think so.
Yeah. Thank you.
Another question?
Daniel, do you have more questions, please?
So yeah, we have a question from Francisco Bavera from Argentina. So the question is, how can I'm sorry, let me read it again here. So would it be worth making explicit how problem-solving strategies play out differently depending on the model of computation adopted?
Depending on the model of what?
The model of computation adopted.
What do you mean by the model of computation adopted?
I think that in this case, maybe he's referring from of AI and the different models of large language models, maybe, and that's my interpretation of the question. If you have like another, it will be okay, like to hear it.
Well, okay, now read the whole question. Do I think what?
Will it be worth making explicit how problem-solving strategies play out differently depending on the model of computation adopted? That's the questions from Francisco Bavera in Argentina.
Let me adapt that question because I'm not really sure what model of computation the different models of computation he has in mind. But if he has different, if he has in mind different models of AI, like a different AI model, then I think it's actually important to understand the limitations and capabilities of each AI model. But that's independent, or it's or kind of orthogonal to how you think about computational thinking. I think computational thinking is applicable to any, you need to think computationally, regardless of what AI model you're using. But maybe you will think about certain things more than others, depending on the AI model. I guess I don't really understand the question.
Thank you, Janet. Don't worry, it's okay. Camila, do you want to read another question from the audience?
Sure.
Yes.
There is this one that was saying like, so in teacher education, what public policy lays the groundwork for advancing computational thinking and treating it as being just as important as reading, writing, and mathematics? I think you've mentioned a couple of things around your role in NSF. Yeah, but like how, and you've mentioned this from your original paper, I think, of like an analytical skill just as important as reading, writing, and mathematics. But how do we make the case that that's actually as important as those things? And how does that has, if you have any knowledge of this, impacted like education schools? Like, I think that's a big challenge for us, where like our education schools usually like go way slower than the rest of the world to like update teacher training programs, to create new curriculum for computer science and for computational thinking. So how can you make the case that this is as important as those other skills that we kind of were born into a system that already taught us how to do reading, writing, and math?
Well, I think one way to think about it is computational thinking is a kind of mathematical skill. First of all, to make computational thinking real, you're going to need to be able to read or write. So those are fundamental skills, reading and writing. Why do we need people to learn mathematics? I actually think learning mathematics and learning computing go hand in hand. With computing, you can do a lot. You can scale the math, scale the problems, math problems that you try to solve. And computing is in the end a mathematical science. It's based on mathematics. I think the difference is that typically, I'm not going to say all of computational thinking, but typically computational thinking is more operational than mathematics. That's why algorithms are so key. But actually, in my area of research, it's not so much about operationalizing abstraction. It's really about declarative abstractions, which are much more like mathematics. So I think there's a practical reason, maybe less philosophical, which is for people to operate in today's world. It is a digital world. And the more you understand the capability and limitations of the digital world, the more you are bringing benefits to your own job, to your discipline, to your life. I really see that those who, and people have been saying this more recently with AI. AI or computational thinking is going to give you an edge over someone who doesn't know this technology or doesn't know the skill set. It's just, you know, I see it with people every day around me. And so that's why I think teaching computational thinking, whether it's to primary school students or in college, whenever you learn it, or as you're learning your own discipline, whether you're in law school or journalism, just learning some of these basic skills will help you, will give you the advantage over someone who doesn't know these skills. So that's a very practical answer. It's not, there's no scientific, I have no scientific argument. I don't even have a good philosophical one.
I agree, and I think that's connecting back to this idea of like educational gaps and whether if we don't bring this into schools.
Here's another answer that is going to be harder to make, which is, you know, maybe some people have thought teaching computing will actually help students learn math. And it's a way to teach math. But I don't know that I believe that. But if I do believe in math, I think math is really important for students to learn. But if computing can help them learn math, then learn the math skills, then so much the better. So that's why I see math and computing, you know, sitting side by side, the way reading and writing kind of sit side by side. And maybe, yeah. So again, I don't study this.
No, I totally understand and agree. I also think data science has a lot of potential to help learning math because of like data visualization, all the statistical reasoning that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
And again, I also think that not integrating it will extend the gap of like those who can access it, those who cannot access it. So I think that's another important point. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're raising a really important point. The point is there's only so much time and energy that a student has to learn things in his or her life as he or she's growing up. And we as educators need to be very thoughtful about what we are teaching our students to make sure they are armed for life, to learn any other skill, and to be able to succeed in their lives and succeed in their careers. So in that small amount of time that we have to help shape their brains, what should we be teaching? And all these different things are competing with each other. So I don't have a good answer. It may be a rebalancing. You know, I worry now that students aren't even reading books.
Yeah.
A global problem. Yeah.
So just a comment. This brought to my mind this idea. There is like an eminent figure in Latin America called Paulo Freire, who was an educator, a Brazilian educator, and he would say that you don't want to teach kids to learn how to read just so they can read a book, which is important, but also because everywhere they go in this society, they will need to be able to read. If they go to the bank, if they go to the government. And so in that same way, in this computational world, if you don't give them the tools, they won't be able to participate. So I think that connects very well. Thank you.
That's very well said. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeannette. Thank you, Camilo. We are starting to close this session. Thank you so much, Jeannette, for your time, for sharing with us all your ideas, all your concepts, all your vision on what the computational thinking, what has happened in this last 20 years. Also, I would like to thank to all the audience that was watching very focusedly in this session and paying a lot of attention in what we are talking about and all this. We would like to finish this session with a conclusion from your part about what do you think computation, what's the next in computer vision, what we can expect, not very clearly, but what is next? What do you see? What we can start being paying attention for the evolution of all this process?
I think I partly answered that when I answered Daniel's question earlier, when he asked me, does AI add more things that we have to learn, or do we get rid of things that we don't need anymore? I do think the importance of data, the importance of probability and statistics, which is another kind of math, we'll see a growing importance of those. And we can cram that into the computational thinking skill set that we need to learn. That may mean that but I am, after what happened to the computer science community when ChatGPT came out, and how we were all taken by surprise, and how we continue, and how the technology continues to advance rapidly. I don't make predictions anymore. I don't look into the future beyond like the next year or half a year. But I do think computer science will still be around. Computational thinking will still be important, regardless of what you major in, regardless of what job you're in, and regardless of what additional skills you acquire along the way. Computational thinking will be a good repertoire of skills to have.
Thank you so much, Jeannette. It was a pleasure for having you here. Erika, Daniel, Camilo, thank you so much. We are closing the session right now. It was very important. An applause for Jeannette. Thank you so much. And we hope in the next sessions you can follow us. I will send you a link. And thank you, everybody, for being with us.
Thank you.
Have a good
Gracias
afternoon.
a todos y todas por participar.
Gracias a todos.
Gracias, excelente día.
Excelente día, gracias.